My name is Elaine Murphy, and the first sign that my role in my son's life had quietly expired came wrapped in cream-colored cardstock with gold embossed lettering. It arrived on a Tuesday in March, slipped between a water bill and a grocery store circular. I opened it with casual indifference, expecting yet another real estate flyer. But the envelope felt expensive, thick, textured, deliberate. Mr. and Mrs. Jason Murphy request the honor of your presence. I had to read it twice before it registered. My son was getting married. And this was how I found out. No phone call. No lunch invitation. No heartfelt announcement. Just a formal, printed card like I was a distant relative they barely remembered but couldn't leave off the list. I stood in my kitchen, the invitation resting beside a stack of overdue bills. Jason was 28 now. He lived in a downtown high-rise condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and valet parking. I'd seen it once, briefly. He worked in tech and made more in a month than I did in 6 working insurance claims from a cubicle that smelled like old carpet. Barbara, his fiancée, was polished and poised. I'd met her only twice, once at brunch, once at Christmas. She looked around my apartment like she was afraid to touch anything, like poverty might rub off. The wedding was scheduled for June 15th at the Magnolia Hill Country Club. Black tie optional, it said in small print. I didn't own anything that qualified. My best dress was navy blue, 5 years old, and bought from the clearance rack for Jason's college graduation. Still, I held the card gently. My fingers traced the gold lettering, heart wavering between pride and rejection. I was invited, technically, but I had never felt more like a stranger in my son's life. That evening, I called Jason. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice distant, distracted like always. I imagined him scrolling through emails or finishing a text while I spoke. "I got the invitation," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Oh, good," he replied, no warmth, just acknowledgement. "Congratulations, honey? Barbara seems lovely." A pause. "Yeah, she is. Listen about the wedding." "I'd love to help," I interrupted, already standing near my kitchen table with a pen in hand. "I know planning a wedding can be overwhelming. Maybe I can help with the flowers or tasting the cake." "Mom, stop." His tone was sharper now. "It's all taken care of. Barbara's parents are handling everything." "I wasn't talking about money, Jason. I meant being part of it. A mother-son dance. Helping you pick the boutonnieres. You know, being involved." "We've already picked all of that," he said, sighing. "Look, just show up. Okay? Wear something nice, but not, too conservative. Barbara's family is kind of traditional." "Something nice, but not to me." "I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady though the familiar ache was rising in my chest. "I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone." "It's not about embarrassment," he muttered, then added quickly, "Never mind. I've got to go. Barbara's making dinner." The call ended, leaving only the soft hum of my refrigerator and the silent weight of disappointment. I stared at the phone in my hand and then at the invitation still lying on the table. The words "black tie optional" gleamed under the kitchen light. Optional perhaps, but so was I. After that call, I made a decision. If I was going to be an outsider at my own son's wedding, I would still show up with my head held high. For the next 3 months, I saved every dollar I could. I skipped meals, walked to work instead of taking the bus, and canceled my cable subscription. I clipped coupons with precision, counted every penny, and said no to every small indulgence. By May, I had scraped together enough to buy a new dress. Not just any dress, one that made me feel like I belonged in a room full of country club members and designer labels. I chose a deep emerald green gown, simple but elegant, from a department store I'd never dared to enter before. It cost more than I'd spent on myself in years. I bought matching shoes, low heels, silver accents. I had my graying hair professionally styled for the first time in over a decade. The stylist added soft curls and subtle highlights, and when she turned me toward the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. For a moment, I let myself imagine the way Jason might look at me. Maybe there'd be a flicker of surprise. Maybe he'd tell me I looked beautiful. Maybe he'd introduce me to his in-laws with a glint of pride. That morning, standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I touched the neckline of my dress and breathed deeply. The woman staring back wasn't just someone's mother. She was dignified, present, whole. No matter what happened that day, I was going to walk into that wedding knowing I had done everything I could. Not for Jason. For me. Because sometimes dignity is the only gift you can still give yourself when others have forgotten your worth. The country club was exactly what I imagined: pristine grounds, manicured lawns, a shimmering lake in the distance. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, BMWs, Mercedes, even a few Teslas. I had washed my 15-year-old Honda Civic the day before, hoping it might blend in. It didn't. Inside, the lobby glowed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Guests mingled in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I walked slowly, my heels tapping against the polished floor, trying not to feel so terribly out of place. I spotted Jason near the staircase, resplendent in a black tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile wide as he laughed at something Barbara's father had said. Barbara stood beside him, radiant in a gown that looked straight out of a bridal magazine. They looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. I approached, my heart a tight fist inside my chest. Jason's eyes found mine. His smile faltered not with warmth or recognition, but with something that looked unsettlingly like dread. "Mom," he said, voice carefully neutral, "you made it." "You look so handsome," I said, reaching to straighten his bow tie like I had done 100 times when he was younger. He stepped back slightly, breaking the contact. "Thanks, you look nice." There was a pause before nice just long enough to sting. Barbara's father extended a hand. "You must be Jason's mother, Tom Whitmore." "Elaine Murphy," I said, shaking his hand. "Congratulations on gaining such a wonderful son-in-law." "Indeed," he replied, smiling politely before turning back to Jason. I stood there a moment longer, then quietly stepped away. Just like that, I faded into the background of my son's wedding. And no one seemed to notice. The reception hall was a masterpiece of understated luxury. White linens draped across round tables, crystal stemware sparkled under chandeliers, and towering floral arrangements filled the air with the scent of roses and eucalyptus. Each table had a name card. I found mine at table 8, tucked in the farthest corner of the room, right beside the swinging doors to the kitchen. The other guests at my table were strangers. An elderly woman with a hearing aid, a couple who looked nervous in their formal wear, and several empty chairs that would remain unfilled. We were clearly the afterthoughts. At the front of the room sat the head table, Jason and Barbara in the center, surrounded by her family. Table 1 held the Whitmores' closest friends. Table 2 was reserved for Jason's college buddies and their wives. Table 3, Barbara's sorority sisters. It was a diagram of proximity to importance. I sat down quietly and tried not to feel humiliated. A woman in her 60s approached, looking around uncertainly. "Are you Jason's mother?" she asked with a gentle smile. "I'm Margaret, Barbara's great aunt. Would you mind if I sat with you? I don't know anyone else here." "Of course," I said, relieved to see a friendly face. She sat beside me and leaned in. "All this is very beautiful, but not really my world. You know?" "I do," I said, smiling faintly. "But it's Jason's special day. That's what matters." As the cocktail hour dragged on, I watched Jason work the room like a seasoned politician. He shook hands, shared laughter, posed for photos, making time for everyone. Except me. I told myself he'd come over soon, that he was just caught up in the moment, that I was saving the best for last. But as each minute passed, a hollow feeling opened up inside me, slow and wide and familiar. The same old ache of being forgotten by the one person you loved the most. Dinner began with practiced elegance. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork, serving the head table first, then working their way through the hierarchy of tables 1 through 7. At our table, we waited patiently. Margaret received her plate first, lukewarm, but edible. Then came the elderly woman's, followed by the nervous couple. And then nothing. A young server approached me flustered. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. There was a mix-up in the kitchen. Your meal will be out in just a few minutes." 20 minutes passed, then 30. Around us, the other guests were finishing their meals, raising glasses, and laughing at inside jokes. I sat quietly in front of an empty place setting, stomach growling, pride shrinking by the minute. Eventually, a different server brought my plate. The salmon was cold, the asparagus limp. The potatoes looked like they had been scraped off someone else's plate and left under a heat lamp. Margaret glanced at it and whispered, "That's inexcusable." But I smiled and said, "It's fine. I'm just happy to be here." That was a lie, but one I'd grown used to telling. I was halfway through the cold salmon when I heard Jason's voice echo across the room. He stood, preparing for his thank you speech. But before addressing the guests, he leaned toward Barbara, just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Did you see? They finally brought my mom her food," he said with a smirk. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind. She won't mind." Barbara laughed high and brittle. A few others joined in, following her lead. I set down my fork. My hands were steady, though something inside me cracked wide open. Margaret looked horrified. "Did he just?" "I'm fine," I said again. But the words felt like ashes in my mouth. Because that joke was the truth. At least the truth of how he saw me. After dinner, the lights dimmed and the music swelled. Jason and Barbara stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance, gliding together like a picture-perfect couple in a movie scene. I watched from my corner, smiling politely, my hands folded in my lap. My dress, my hair, my shoes all chosen with care for a moment I thought would matter. Then came the parent dances. Barbara's father, Tom, twirled her with ease, his movements polished and proud. Barbara's mother took Jason's hand next, swaying with him slowly, sentimentally. I waited. Surely my son would come find me. Surely he hadn't forgotten. I'd imagined this moment so many times. I had even practiced a few steps in my small apartment, dancing slowly with no partner, letting the old music from my phone fill the silence. But as the evening wore on, more family joined in. Cousins, uncles, friends, all spinning and laughing under the golden lights. Jason never looked my way. No hand extended, no nod in my direction, no mother-son dance. He was too busy, too celebrated, too wrapped up in the life he had built, one where I existed only on the margins. And I finally understood. I wasn't invited to participate. I was only invited to witness, quietly, from the shadows. Margaret leaned over and whispered, "Are you all right, dear?" I looked at the laughter, the swirling gowns, the man who used to be my little boy, now dancing through a life that had no room for me. For the first time all evening, I felt entirely clear. "I'm perfect," I said. And for once, I meant it. I stood, smoothed my emerald dress one last time, and walked toward the exit. No one noticed me leave. Not Jason. Not Barbara. Not a single soul. Back home, the silence felt different, like something had finally settled. I hung my emerald dress in the back of the closet, changed into jeans and a t-shirt, then sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. And I began to write. Not in anger, not in grief, but with a clarity I had never known before. Jason, I'm writing this while your wedding is still fresh in my mind, though I suspect the parts I remember will be different from what you'll choose to keep. Your comment last night, about me being used to eating what life leaves behind, wasn't just cruel. It was honest. And that honesty gave me something I didn't expect: perspective. You're right, Jason. I have spent years accepting leftovers. Leftover time, leftover attention, leftover respect. I taught you without meaning to that it was acceptable to treat me as second best. I accepted scraps and called it love. But not anymore? Effective immediately, I'm ending all financial support. That includes the $500 monthly deposits you thought came from a trust fund. There is no trust fund. That was me working overtime, skipping meals, delaying my own life so you could build yours. I'm also canceling the credit card I opened in your name, which you've used for car repairs, flights, and vacations. And I am selling the house, the one you assumed would someday be yours. It's worth approximately $340,000 in today's market. I'll be using that money to travel, to rest, to live. You once asked why I never remarried. The truth is, I was too busy being your mother to be anything else. I poured everything I had into raising you, thinking someday you'd love me not just as a provider but as a person. I was wrong. This isn't a punishment. This isn't revenge. This is me finally choosing to matter to myself. I hope your marriage brings you joy. I hope one day you understand the difference between being loved and being respected. You'll always be my son. but I will no longer be your safety net. Mom. I read the email 3 times before hitting send at 3:47 a.m. No dramatic punctuation. No hidden messages, just the truth. By noon, Jason replied, "Mom, what the hell is this? Are you having some kind of breakdown? I think you misunderstood what happened at the wedding. It was just a joke. Everyone was laughing, not just at you. You're being way too sensitive. Can we talk like adults? Selling the house is insane. That's my inheritance you're talking about." Dad would roll over in his grave. "Barbara thinks you might be having some midlife crisis. She knows a therapist who specializes in women your age. Let's talk on Sunday. I'll come over." I didn't reply. By Friday, I had changed my phone number. Saturday brought a second email, shorter and sharper. "Mom, I've been calling for 2 days. Pick up your phone. We need to talk about this house before you do something stupid. I talked to a lawyer. You can't just cut me out of my inheritance. Call me back." I forwarded that one to my realtor with a short note. "Please expedite the listing process." By Tuesday morning, the house was on the market. By Thursday, we had 2 offers. I accepted the higher one, $15,000 over asking price, cash, 30-day close. Sunday came Jason's final message. "You win. Whatever point you're trying to make, congratulations. You've ruined our relationship and embarrassed me in front of Barbara's family. I hope it was worth it. Don't contact me again." I printed it and placed it in a folder labeled evidence, not for court, for memory. The closing was scheduled for July 20th. I put down deposits on a furnished apartment in Savannah and a month-long bed and breakfast in Vermont for the fall. For the first time in 30 years, I was making plans that didn't revolve around Jason's schedule, his needs, or his approval. The woman who raised him had done her job. And she was finally free to do something else. To live. Savannah was warm when I arrived, not just in temperature, but in spirit. I rented a small apartment 4 blocks from the river, on a quiet street where people still nodded hello. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I took a part-time job at a local bookstore owned by a woman named Rita, who hired me on the spot after our 10-minute conversation. "You seem like someone who understands that books are more than merchandise," she said. She was right. I spent my days surrounded by stories. I spent my evenings walking along the water, eating simple meals, reading on a second-hand porch swing I'd picked up at a yard sale. For 3 months, I didn't hear from Jason, not a call, not a letter, not a sign. Then, one Thursday afternoon in October, Rita handed me a note. "Some man called looking for you," she said he was your son. He sounded desperate. I folded the message and tucked it into my pocket. 2 days later, Jason showed up in person. He looked smaller, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive shoes were scuffed. His voice cracked when he said my name. "Please," he whispered, "can we talk?" I told him I got off work at 6. The cafe next door closed at 7. He had 1 hour. That evening, I sat across from him as he stumbled through an apology, his words carefully chosen, rehearsed. "I miss you," he said. "I miss having a mother who believed in me." "I did believe in you," I answered, "but belief without boundaries isn't love. It's enablement." He asked how to fix it, how to start over. I told him he couldn't. Not because I hated him, but because I had already left. He just hadn't noticed until the benefits stopped. As I walked away from that cafe and into the soft Savannah night, I didn't look back. I had spent 30 years accepting leftovers. Now, I was building a life where I set the table. And this time I was choosing where I sat. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the silent sacrifices so many make in the name of love, then let's talk about it. Have you ever given so much of yourself that there was nothing left for you? Elaine's journey wasn't about revenge and anger. It was about reclaiming dignity. About finally saying enough. If you believe in boundaries, in second chances for yourself, not for those who used you, then like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and leave a comment below. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply choosing yourself.
I could hear the echo of his voice before I even looked up. Ryan Mitchell stood tall in the courtroom, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his chin raised with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. "I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate," he declared, his words rolling through the chamber like an announcement of victory. My name is Melissa Turner. I am 44 years old, a businesswoman from Austin, Texas, and never once in my life did I imagine I would be sitting at the defendant's table in divorce court, facing the man who once promised to love me. Ryan had not only betrayed our marriage but had come here today to strip me of everything my grandmother had worked a lifetime to build. The room carried the weight of judgment. Rows of dark wooden benches were filled with spectators leaning forward, eager for a scandalous story. A few local reporters had their pens ready, their eyes darting between Ryan and me. I knew exactly what they were thinking, another wealthy woman about to lose her fortune to a smooth-talking husband. But they had no idea what was coming. Judge Richardson, a stern woman with sharp eyes behind her glasses, presided over the case. She reviewed the opening statements with the calm of someone who had seen dozens of couples destroy each other across this very room. Still, I sensed she had never witnessed the turn this case was about to take. Ryan smirked at me from across the aisle, the same smile that once made me believe I had found a partner, not a predator. My hands tightened around the leather strap of my purse where a sealed envelope rested. That envelope contained the truth, the protection, and the ending Ryan never expected. As the judge addressed me, asking if I had any response, I stood. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at Ryan, I believe the court needs to see something first. Before that day in court, before the smirk and the suit and the threat of taking half my life away, there was a different Ryan Mitchell. Or at least there was the version of him I first met. It was 3 years after my grandmother passed, and I was still carrying the weight of her absence. She had been the one constant in my life, the person who believed in me when no one else did. Losing her left me pouring everything into my small consulting firm, Turner Analytics, with no space left for companionship. That was when Ryan walked into my life at a business conference in Dallas. He was polished, confident, and seemed genuinely interested in the work I did. While most men's eyes glazed over at the mention of data models and small business growth strategies, Ryan leaned in, asking thoughtful questions. You're brilliant, he said, almost in awe. I've never met anyone who understands numbers the way you do. For a woman who had spent years hearing that she was too serious, too focused, too independent, his admiration felt like sunlight. Ryan quickly became the antidote to my loneliness. He planned dinners at cozy restaurants, weekend getaways to the hill country, and even showed up at my office with flowers just because. It wasn't just romance, it was timing. I was tired, vulnerable, and ready to believe that maybe fate had finally given me a partner. Looking back, I can see the subtle signs I ignored. The way he always chose the most expensive bottles of wine. How he bragged about connections at high-end golf clubs, even though his own career as a pharmaceutical sales manager never seemed to justify the lifestyle he flaunted. But in those days, I told myself he was just generous, that he wanted to treat me the way I deserved after years of hard work. One evening, as we sat by the riverfront watching the city lights flicker on the water, Ryan turned to me and said, Melissa, life is too short to spend it alone. You deserve someone who sees how special you are. I believed him. I wanted so badly to believe that someone could see me, the woman behind the spreadsheets and late nights, and not just my bank account. I didn't know then that Ryan wasn't just seeing me. He was calculating me. 9 months after that first conference in Dallas, Ryan dropped to one knee at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Austin skyline. A string quartet played softly, and the ring he held sparkled under the city lights. I remember gasping, not just at the gesture, but at the speed of it all. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, her warnings about men who rushed things, but Ryan silenced every doubt with his charm. Why wait, he said, smiling up at me, when I already know you're the one I want forever. I said yes. Within days, my best friend and attorney, Claire Hudson, pulled me aside. Melissa, you need a prenuptial agreement, she insisted. You've built your business from the ground up, and you may inherit more from your family. Love is beautiful, but contracts protect you when love isn't enough. At first I bristled. A prenup felt cold, almost insulting, like I was questioning Ryan's sincerity. Still, I trusted Claire's judgment. With reluctance, I asked Ryan about it. His reaction surprised me. He laughed. Of course, darling, whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for you. He signed the agreement without hesitation, barely glancing at the clauses Claire had drafted. He even joked, love doesn't need fine print. But hey, I'll sign it if it helps you sleep at night. The pen scratched across the paper, his signature bold and carefree. I felt a wave of relief. If Ryan could sign something so serious with such ease, surely it meant he had no ulterior motives. The prenup became a tucked-away document, locked in my attorney's file cabinet, and I allowed myself to believe I was safe. Ryan's lighthearted attitude convinced me that I'd overthought everything. That night, as he slipped the ring back on my finger and toasted to our future, I pushed my grandmother's warning aside. I told myself I had found a man who loved me for who I was, not for the wealth I had, or might one day inherit. I didn't realize then that his laughter wasn't reassurance, it was strategy. 18 months into our marriage, everything shifted with a single phone call. My grandmother's estate, the one she had quietly built through decades of discipline and sacrifice, finally came to me. The inheritance included her home, carefully managed investments, and a trust fund worth just over $3.2 million. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, stunned as the numbers sank in. I hadn't expected that level of wealth, and I certainly hadn't prepared for the changes it would bring. Ryan's reaction was the first sign that something was wrong. His eyes lit up in a way I had never seen before, not with joy for me, but with hunger. $3.2 million, he repeated slowly, almost tasting the words. Then he grinned. Melissa, we're rich. The emphasis on we should have been my warning, but I was still too overwhelmed to notice. I thought he was simply excited for us as a couple. Within 6 months, Ryan quit his job, claiming he wanted to support me and explore new opportunities. What it really meant was living off my inheritance. He leased a luxury car, joined an exclusive golf club, and booked vacations to destinations I hadn't even dreamed of. When I asked where the money was coming from, his answer was always the same: we're partners. Why question it? I tried to be understanding at first. Marriage, I told myself, was about compromise. But as the credit card bills piled up and failed investments drained accounts, I began to see the truth. One of his ventures, backing a trendy bar his friend wanted to open, burned through $40,000 in less than a year. He shrugged it off like it was pocket change. Meanwhile, the man who once praised my intelligence now dismissed my concerns. Melissa, stop worrying. What's the point of money if you don't enjoy it? He'd say, pouring another glass of wine at some overpriced restaurant. It was as if the inheritance had transformed Ryan into someone I barely recognized. Or maybe, more painfully, it revealed who he had been all along. It wasn't just the spending that broke us, it was the arrogance that came with it. Ryan began introducing himself at social gatherings as an entrepreneur, bragging about our fortune as though it had come from his own hands. At the country club, I overheard him telling another couple that the inheritance was family money, implying it had always belonged to both of us. The lie stung. My grandmother had trusted me with her legacy, and now Ryan was parading it as if it were his birthright. The tension at home grew unbearable. Every time I questioned a purchase or suggested caution, Ryan turned defensive. One evening, after I confronted him about the failed bar investment, he snapped. Stop acting like this is your money, Melissa. Everyone knows you married me because you were lonely. I gave you a life, and you should be grateful. His words landed like a slap. For years, I had believed he loved me. In that moment, I realized he had simply calculated me. The arguments grew sharper, cutting deeper with each round. Ryan accused me of being stingy, cold, unwilling to share. I accused him of bleeding me dry. The man who once brought me flowers now left bills on the counter like little reminders of his dominance. He started to spend more nights out, coming home late, his cologne heavy with the scent of clubs and whiskey. When I pressed him, he laughed. Relax, you'd be lost without me. You need me more than I need you. But I didn't laugh. I started to see through the charm, the smile, the carefully constructed facade. My grandmother had warned me about men like this, men who saw women as stepping stones. I had ignored her voice then, but now it echoed louder than ever. The cracks in our marriage weren't just lines, they were canyons. And I knew sooner or later I would have to make a choice, keep letting him drain me, or finally reclaim my life. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Ryan had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to look. What I found made my stomach twist. There were emails between Ryan and a divorce attorney, carefully outlining strategies to maximize his settlement. He had been planning this for months, discussing timing, assets, even ways to claim emotional contributions as justification for a larger share. He wasn't just reckless, he was deliberate. I sat in silence that night, staring at the screen, the truth sinking in. The man who once promised forever had been plotting my downfall like a business deal. My heart broke, but alongside the pain came clarity. If Ryan wanted a battle, Then he would get one, but it would not end the way he expected. The very next morning, I called Claire Hudson, my attorney and longtime friend. When she heard the details, her voice was calm but firm. "Melissa, you still have the prenuptial agreement. That document is stronger than his schemes. We'll be ready." We spent weeks preparing, gathering bank statements, keeping records of every expense, every failed investment, every debt that was in his name alone. Claire reminded me to keep the inheritance separate, and I had done exactly that. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in my own home: control. Instead of waiting for Ryan to make the first move, I filed for divorce myself. If he wanted a courtroom spectacle, I would walk into that courtroom with every weapon he had underestimated. Sitting at my desk one evening, reviewing the documents with Claire, I whispered to myself, "This ends with me, not him." And in that moment, I believed it. The courtroom felt like a stage the morning our trial began. Reporters scribbled notes, spectators leaned forward, and Ryan strutted in like a man about to collect his prize. His lawyer, a polished man in a gray suit named Mark Walters, opened with confidence. "Your Honor, my client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the substantial inheritance Miss Turner received during the marriage." The words hung in the air like a dagger pointed straight at me. I stayed calm. Across the aisle, Ryan flashed me a victorious smile, the same grin that once convinced me he was safe. Now it only revealed his greed. I glanced at Claire beside me. Her hand rested gently on my arm, steadying me. "Wait for the right moment," she whispered. The judge, firm and measured, turned to me. "Mrs. Turner, do you have any response?" My heart raced, but my voice was steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "Your Honor, I believe the court should review this document before any discussion of assets continues." Gasps rippled through the room as I walked the envelope to the bench. Judge Richardson broke the seal and began reading. Ryan shifted in his chair, confusion flashing across his face. "What is that?" he demanded, leaning toward his attorney. Walters looked uncertain, his polished veneer cracking as he scanned the pages Judge Richardson held. "It's a prenuptial agreement," the judge announced, her tone even but commanding. "Executed prior to the marriage, signed by both parties, witnessed and notarized. This court will take time to review its contents." The room buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled faster, eyes darting between me and Ryan. Ryan's confidence began to crumble. He leaned forward, whispering frantically to Walters. "She never told me it was just a formality," I heard him hiss. Walters pressed a hand to his forehead, already realizing the damage. Meanwhile, Claire sat perfectly still, her calm expression saying everything. Our plan was unfolding exactly as intended. Minutes passed as the judge flipped through the pages. Ryan tapped his fingers nervously, his smirk long gone. Finally, Judge Richardson looked up. "This agreement is valid, thorough, and binding. It clearly protects all premarital assets and explicitly defines any inheritance received during the marriage as separate property." Her eyes narrowed at Ryan. "Mr. Mitchell, did you sign this document of your own free will?" Ryan sputtered. I thought it was just symbolic." Melissa said. The judge cut him off. "Did anyone force you to sign?" His silence stretched until he muttered, "No, Your Honor." The tension in the room shifted, spectators whispering louder now. They could see the tide turning. For the first time, Ryan's mask had slipped, and everyone could see what lay beneath: fear. By the second afternoon of testimony, it was clear the tide had fully turned. Judge Richardson, meticulous in her review, read aloud from the agreement for the record. Section 4, Paragraph B, "Any inheritance received by either party during the marriage shall be considered separate property and shall not be subject to division upon divorce." The words landed like thunder. Reporters lifted their heads in unison, pens scratching furiously to capture every detail. Ryan gripped the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That can't be legal," he muttered, but his voice was barely audible over the shuffle of papers. Walters tried one last desperate angle, arguing that Ryan hadn't fully understood the document. The judge was unimpressed. "Mr. Walters, your client signed, waived his right to independent counsel, and confirmed his identity before a notary. Ignorance is not a defense." When she finally delivered her ruling, the silence was absolute. "This court recognizes the prenuptial agreement as valid and binding. Mr. Mitchell is entitled to no portion of Mrs. Turner's inheritance or premarital assets. Furthermore, all debts incurred in his name remain his sole responsibility." She paused, her gaze steady on Ryan. "The total documented debt stands at $92,000. A stunned hush filled the room, broken only by the faint click of a reporter's camera. Ryan sagged into his chair, his face drained of color. The confident man who had strutted in expecting millions now faced nothing but debt and humiliation. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the calm weight of justice settle over me. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like closure. The nightmare was over. Ryan had gambled on greed and lost everything, and I, for the first time in years, felt free. In the weeks after the ruling, Ryan's perfect image unraveled piece by piece. The country club suspended his membership when he could no longer pay the dues. The luxury car he had paraded around town was repossessed, leaving him borrowing rides from friends who soon stopped answering his calls. His debts piled higher, creditors circling like vultures. Within 6 months, bankruptcy was the only option left. Word spread quickly through Austin's business circles. Ryan Mitchell, once the charming husband of a successful consultant, had tried to take what wasn't his and failed spectacularly. Women whispered warnings about him, his name becoming a cautionary tale at dinner parties and networking events. The reputation he had carefully polished for years crumbled in a matter of weeks. Eventually, he retreated to his parents' home, starting over at 47 with nothing but resentment and regret. For me, the end of our marriage marked the beginning of something far more powerful. I used part of my inheritance to create the Turner Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women protect their financial futures. We offered legal workshops on prenuptial agreements, financial planning, and resources for those trapped in toxic marriages. Every time a woman told me she felt stronger, safer, and more prepared because of our work, I thought of my grandmother. Her wisdom had saved me, and now it could save others. Looking back, I don't see myself as a victim of Ryan's greed. I see myself as someone who learned, fought back, and rebuilt. Painful as it was, his betrayal forced me to stand taller and to honor the legacy my grandmother entrusted to me. And in that sense, the inheritance became more than money. It became a shield, a voice, and a chance to give other women the strength to say, never again. As I walked out of that courtroom for the last time, sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of lies, manipulation, and fear was gone. Ryan had gambled on greed, and greed had written his downfall. What remained for me was peace and purpose. His story is a reminder that love without respect becomes control, and control without limits becomes destruction. A marriage built on taking will always collapse under its own weight. Ryan thought he could charm, threaten, and scheme his way into a fortune. Instead, he left with nothing but debt and the lesson that paper, signatures, and truth carry more weight than arrogance ever will. For those listening, take this to heart. Protecting yourself does not mean you love less. It means you honor the years of sacrifice, the work, the legacy you carry. My grandmother's advice, once brushed aside, became the safeguard that preserved everything she left me. I hope my story urges someone out there to listen to their own inner voice and to never apologize for setting boundaries. If this story has resonated with you, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of resilience and justice, and share this video with someone who might need the reminder. Your worth is never defined by someone else's greed. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living free, secure, and unbroken. My name is Marilyn Cooper. I am 52 years old, and for the past 27 years I have lived for one person only, my son Ryan. I raised him alone after his father walked out. I carried every burden, worked night shifts at the hospital cafeteria, and stretched every dollar until it nearly broke. To me, Ryan's wedding was supposed to be the proof that I had done something right, that all those sacrifices had led him to become the man he was meant to be. But the night before the ceremony, everything I believed in collapsed with just one sentence. I had stopped by the rehearsal dinner with a small gift, a scrapbook of Ryan's life that I had worked on for weeks. Every page held a piece of our story, from scraped knees to law school acceptance letters. I thought his fiancée, Madison Clark, might appreciate seeing what shaped the man she was about to marry. I stood at the doorway, scrapbook pressed against my chest, heart beating with quiet pride. Madison appeared, flawless as always, perfect smile, perfect hair, and a dress that could have graced a magazine cover. But her eyes were cold, colder than I had ever seen them. She didn't look at the scrapbook. She looked straight at me, leaned close enough that no one else could hear, and whispered words that burned like acid. After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My knees felt weak, my hands shook, and the scrapbook nearly slipped. I whispered, "Excuse me." She smirked, repeating it more clearly. You raised him, but tomorrow he becomes mine. You are just extra baggage. Do us both a favor and don't come. Her tone was sharp, her eyes almost amused. I froze, silent, clinging to the book like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That night, I drove home in a haze, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the scrapbook. My tears blurred the photos, but somewhere beneath the heartbreak, anger stirred. I whispered to the empty room, if I am not family tomorrow, then tomorrow I will not be there at all. And with that decision, the story truly began. When Ryan was only 7 years old, his father packed a single suitcase and walked out the front door. I still remember the sound of it closing, sharp and final, like the ending of a chapter we had not agreed to finish. Ryan clutched a toy dinosaur in one hand and asked me when Dad was coming home. I had no answer. I only pulled him close and promised him that no matter what, I would always be there. That promise became the compass of my life. From that night forward, it was just the two of us. I became the breadwinner, the caregiver, the cheerleader, and the disciplinarian, all rolled into one. I worked late nights in the hospital cafeteria, the smell of disinfectant and coffee clinging to my uniform as I stumbled home at dawn. Some mornings I barely managed to pack Ryan's lunch before collapsing for an hour of sleep. Yet whenever he came home waving a paper with a gold star, or handed me a handmade Mother's Day card with crooked hearts and misspelled words, the exhaustion faded. In those moments, I felt rich in ways money could never measure. Vacations were out of reach. Promotions slipped away because I could not commit to overtime or weekend hours. I learned how to stretch every dollar, how to fix a leaky faucet with duct tape, how to make soup last 3 nights. Ryan never knew the depth of those sacrifices. I hid the tiredness behind smiles, determined that his childhood would not be defined by absence or lack. To the world he might have looked like any other boy, but to me he was proof that love could fill even the emptiest spaces. As he grew, I saw his character forming. He studied harder than anyone, fueled not by competition but by conviction. One night when he was a teenager, I found him at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. He looked up and said, "Mom, I want to be a lawyer." I asked him why, expecting him to talk about success or money. Instead he said, "I want to protect people who can't protect themselves the way you always protected me." Those words carried me through countless weary shifts. They reminded me that every sacrifice mattered, every missed opportunity had built something greater. By the time Ryan walked across the stage at law school graduation, I knew that I had kept my promise. I had raised a man who was kind, intelligent, and strong. His wedding, I believed, would be the moment when all those years of struggle transformed into joy, not just for him but for me too. Or so I thought. When Ryan first introduced me to Madison, I wanted to like her. She had that polished confidence that could light up a room, and she carried herself like someone who knew exactly where she was headed. Ryan's eyes sparkled in her presence, and for that reason alone, I tried to open my heart. After years of imagining I might gain a daughter, I thought maybe this was it, but almost from the beginning there were cracks I tried too hard to ignore. In public, Madison was flawless. She laughed at my stories, asked polite questions, and put on the charm that made everyone believe she was perfect for my son. Yet the moment Ryan left the room, her tone shifted. She would sigh impatiently, check her phone, or let her smile fade into something closer to disdain. It was subtle at first, easy to excuse his nerves. I told myself she was simply trying to find her place in our family dynamic, but deep down, a whisper of doubt began to form. The birthday incident should have told me everything. For Ryan's 26th birthday, I stayed up half the night baking his favorite chocolate fudge cake with peanut butter frosting, a tradition we had kept since he was 10. When I carried it out, candles glowing, Madison looked at it and gave a sweet but cutting remark. "Oh, how quaint. Ryan's on a new diet now. I'll make sure he doesn't touch this." She took the knife from my hand, set the cake aside, and carried on as if she had done him a favor. Ryan laughed awkwardly, kissed my cheek, and thanked me, but I caught the guilt flicker in his eyes. He knew what that cake meant. He knew I had poured myself into it. Moments like that piled up. Madison rarely asked about Ryan's childhood, about the years we scraped by together, or even about my work. Conversations were steered toward her career, her glamorous friends, her plans for the future. Whenever Ryan mentioned his dream of doing pro bono work to help underprivileged clients, she rolled her eyes and quickly changed the subject to salaries or promotions. I began to see what she valued, and it wasn't kindness or sacrifice, it was status. Still, I told myself love was enough. That if Ryan adored her, I would find a way to accept her. So when the engagement came, I hoped things would change. that perhaps she would see me as part of the family. Instead, the distance only grew. Madison took full control of every detail. I wasn't invited to a single dress fitting, cake tasting, or seating chart discussion. When I asked gently if I could help, she gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry, Mrs. Cooper, we've got it under control. You just show up looking nice, okay?" Her words stung, but I nodded and bit my tongue. For Ryan's sake, I told myself. Always for his sake. The morning of the wedding arrived with pale sunlight slipping through the curtains. My body moved on instinct at first. I boiled water for coffee, laid out the pale blue dress I had bought months earlier, the one Ryan once said, "Mom, that color looks beautiful on you." For a few minutes I let myself believe this would be a normal day, one filled with pride and celebration. But then Madison's words from the night before cut through my thoughts like a knife. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore." I sat at the kitchen table staring at the rising steam from my mug. My hands trembled, not from age but from the weight of the decision I already knew I had made. I was not going. For the first time in 27 years, I was choosing myself over Ryan. Maybe it was selfish, maybe cowardly, but I could not bring myself to sit in that church pew and watch him vow his life to a woman who had already erased me from the picture. By 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives. "Mom, we are heading to the venue now. Can't wait to see you. Where are you? You're running late, aren't you?" I turned the phone face down on the table. At 10, my sister knocked at the door, still in her bridesmaid's dress. "Marilyn, what on earth are you doing? Everyone's looking for you." "The ceremony starts in an hour." I met her eyes, tears brimming. "He's marrying someone who told me last night that I am not family. She doesn't want me there. So why should I go?" She froze, her anger faltering into disbelief. "But Marilyn, if you don't go, people will blame you. They will say you abandoned your son." I let out a bitter laugh. "Then let them. I have been judged my whole life. What is one more?" As the church bells began to ring across town, I sat in silence, my dress hanging untouched, the scrapbook hidden under my bed. I thought I had chosen absence, but I had no idea that absence was about to reveal the truth in a way no presence ever could. At 10:30 that morning, while guests were filing into the church, and Ryan adjusted his tie in a small waiting room, the first crack appeared. His best man, Mark, burst through the door pale and shaking. "Ryan, you need to see this," he said, thrusting his phone into my son's hands. On the screen were photos of Madison dressed casually, wrapped in the arms of another man. The man was no stranger. He was her boss, the one she always praised as her mentor. The photos were recent, only 2 weeks old. Ryan's face drained of color. His chest rose and fell as though the air itself had betrayed him. Mark's voice trembled. "Her neighbor sent these to me. He thought you deserved to know before you made the biggest mistake of your life." The weight of the truth he had been ignoring suddenly crashed over him. All the late nights at the office, the secretive messages, the dismissive laughter when he asked questions. It was all true. Madison had been lying. While Ryan staggered under the shock, whispers began to ripple through the church. Madison's maid of honor, already tipsy from champagne, had let something slip to a guest. Madison had not only been unfaithful, she had been scheming. Her family had pressured her into the engagement because Ryan stood on the brink of a promising career. The prenup she had insisted upon was not for his protection. It was written to funnel his future earnings into her family's control. Her father, Richard Clark, had even bragged to a guest that once Madison married Ryan, their financial troubles would vanish. By 11:15, the church was a storm of murmurs and confusion. Ryan stepped into the aisle, his jaw tight, his hands still trembling, but his voice steady enough to echo across the pews. "There will be no wedding today," he declared. "Madison has betrayed my trust." Gasps erupted, followed by the outraged cries of Madison's parents. Her mother wailed. Her father shouted about humiliation. Madison herself tried to grab Ryan's arm, insisting it was a misunderstanding, but the photos told a story no denial could erase. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering about the wasted expense, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Within minutes, phones were buzzing, social media posts multiplying. Headlines would soon follow. Wedding cancelled minutes before vows, bride exposed. And while all of this unfolded, I sat miles away in my quiet living room, unaware of the exact details, but feeling in my bones that the truth had finally broken through. When my sister called, her voice shaking, all she said was, "Marilyn, the wedding is not happening. You need to sit down." By the time the church had emptied and the guests returned home in stunned silence, another storm had already begun to brew. Madison was not about to accept defeat quietly. That very evening she posted a photo of herself in her ruined wedding dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks, with the caption, "Some people just can't let go." Some mothers don't know when to stop. Within hours, the picture spread across social media. Sympathy poured in from strangers who knew nothing of the truth. They saw only a heartbroken bride and the implication that I, Marilyn Cooper, was the villain. Friends and neighbors began calling, some cautious, others outright accusatory. "Marilyn, did you really tell Ryan not to marry her?" I felt my stomach twist at their words. Even people I had known for years questioned my character. I wanted to shout the truth, to tell them Ryan himself had seen the photos, that Madison's betrayal was undeniable. But I stayed silent, partly because Ryan begged me not to respond. "Mom, don't stoop to her level. Everyone close to us knows what really happened." Yet the problem was not everyone did. Lies travel faster than truth, and Madison's family knew how to play their parts. 2 days later, the mail brought something more chilling than gossip. A thick envelope containing a legal letter from Richard Clark's attorney. They accused me of defamation, emotional damages, even interference with contractual relations. The words blurred as I read them, my hands trembling. Contractual relations? What was this if not intimidation? They were not content to smear my name in whispers. They wanted to destroy me formally, legally, financially. I carried the letter straight to my friend Susan Reed, who worked at a law office downtown. She scanned the papers, then shook her head. "Marilyn, this is pure intimidation. They are trying to scare you into silence." That phrase lodged itself in my chest. Scare me into silence. Madison had told me I was not family, and now her parents were trying to erase me completely. But what they did not realize was that fear had long ago lost its hold on me. I had survived loneliness, poverty, and years of single motherhood. If they thought threats could undo me now, they had badly underestimated the woman they were dealing with. A week later, an invitation arrived from the Clarks. They called it a dinner to resolve misunderstandings, but I knew better. Ryan begged me not to attend. "Mom, they will ambush you. Please let me handle this." But I could not stay away. They had dragged my name through the mud, and if I did not face them, their story would become the only story. So I ironed the pale blue dress I had once planned to wear to the wedding and walked into the hotel ballroom with my head held high. The room was set like a stage, chandeliers glittering above polished tables. At the head sat Richard Clark and his wife, with Madison poised beside them in a sleek black dress, her smile sharp as glass. "Well," Richard said smoothly, "look who decided to join us. Miss Cooper, we were just discussing how to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." I met his gaze steadily. "Misunderstanding? Do you mean the affair or the fraud?" I placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were financial records, bankruptcy filings, and most importantly, the prenup. I flipped to a page I had highlighted, Clause 14, Subsection 3. In the event of divorce within 5 years, 75% of Ryan Cooper's income shall be transferred into accounts held jointly by Madison Clark and her father, Richard Clark. Gasps rippled through the table. Even Ryan, who had skimmed the document but never studied it in detail, turned pale. "You were planning to gut him," I said coldly. "You wanted his future to patch your family's failures." Richard's face flushed crimson. "You have no right to cut him off." "I have every right because you smeared my name to hide your schemes." Madison leaned forward, her voice low but venomous. "You would not dare make this public." I leaned in closer. "Watch me." The confrontation spiraled into chaos. Richard threatened lawsuits, his wife wept about family unity. Madison insisted the photos were fake. Ryan sat frozen, his world crumbling. Finally he rose, his voice shaking but firm. "You lied to me. You told my mother she was not family, and all along you were planning to use me. If you loved me, you would never have tried to erase her." For the first time, Madison's mask cracked, desperation spilling through. She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I am done." He turned to me, offered his arm, and together we walked out, leaving their empire of lies behind us. After the confrontation at the hotel, I knew the Clarks would not stop quietly. Their threats and whispers had power only because they controlled the narrative. Madison still painted herself as the heartbroken victim, and her parents framed me as the jealous mother who could not let go. If perception was their weapon, then truth would have to be mine. With Susan Reed's help, I gathered everything we had: copies of the prenup, financial records, even bankruptcy filings that stretched back nearly a decade. Susan connected me with a financial investigator who confirmed what we suspected. The Clarks were drowning in debt. Their plan had been simple. Madison would marry Ryan and the prenup would funnel his income directly into their accounts. It was never about love. It was about survival for their failing empire. We handed the evidence to a journalist who specialized in financial scandals. Within a week, the article went live. Behind the canceled wedding, Clark family's financial schemes exposed. It was damning. Every predatory clause in the prenup was laid out. Their history of bankruptcies was detailed. The affair was mentioned just enough to explain why the wedding had collapsed. For the first time, the public saw the story not from Madison's staged tears, but from the cold weight of facts. The reaction was swift. Sympathy that had once flowed toward Madison turned on her like a tide. Comments filled with outrage called her a gold digger, a fraud, a woman who had tried to erase a mother for the sake of money. People who once whispered accusations about me now sent messages of support. I was no longer the villain. I was a mother who had refused to be erased. Ryan, though heartbroken, found strength in the truth. He poured himself into his new job at the law firm, determined to build a career on integrity rather than illusion. Some nights I found him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars, quiet but resolute. One evening he reached for my hand and whispered, "Mom, you were always my family. Always." His voice carried both grief and gratitude, and in that moment I knew the storm had finally begun to pass. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest battles are not always fought in courtrooms or at family dinners. Sometimes they are fought in the quiet moments, in the decision to stand firm when everyone expects you to bend. Madison told me I was not family. Her parents tried to silence me with threats. But in the end, truth has a way of clawing itself into the light, and when it did, their carefully built facade crumbled. The lesson I carry from this is simple but powerful. Never let anyone convince you that you do not belong in the very family you built with your own sacrifices. I spent years believing that silence was the price of keeping peace. I let myself be dismissed, ignored, even erased. But peace built on lies is not peace at all. It is surrender. That night I chose absence from the wedding. I thought I was stepping back in defeat. What I did not know was that my absence would make space for the truth to surface. Ryan still carries scars from what happened. Betrayal leaves marks no courtroom or article can erase. But he also carries strength. He saw firsthand that love is not measured by status or wealth but by loyalty and honesty. He learned that when someone tries to cut out the people who have stood by you through every storm, that person does not deserve a place in your future. And he tells me often now, "Mom, I should have listened sooner." But sometimes we all need to walk through fire before we recognize who is really standing with us. If you are listening to this, maybe you have faced something similar. Maybe someone has tried to push you aside, to tell you that you do not matter. Let my story remind you, you are not baggage, you are not extra. You are part of the foundation that others stand on, even if they forget it. And when the truth finally emerges, as it always does, those who tried to erase you will have to face their own reflection. So I leave you with this: never surrender your place in the story of your life. Stand firm in who you are and what you have given. And if this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments, press like, and subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories of resilience and truth. Together, let us make sure no voice is silenced, no sacrifice forgotten, and no mother erased from the family she fought so hard to hold together.